Canada has received a 1 month extension on US President Donald Trump's threat of 25% tariffs. We've got 1 month to sort out our business. However, the problems that the tariffs have caused will extend far beyond the 4 years of the Trump administration if Canada doesn't figure out a way to diversify its exports. Joining me today to discuss is Rebel News founder Ezra Levant. I'm Rachel Parker. Welcome back to the Rachel Parker Show. Hey, Ezra, thanks so much for being here. I want to start just by asking you right off the hop. We have 1 month extension on these 25% tariffs coming into effect. Of course, that's also 10% for energy exports. How do you see this next month playing out?
Well, it's really crazy that Canada's parliament has been dissolved by Trudeau. Trudeau is at an all-time low in the polls. He has no mandate. The parliament is not being allowed to have a mandate. The Liberals are attending to internal matters instead. It is in their perverse interest to fight with Donald Trump because that lets them portray themselves as Canadian heroes fighting against an external enemy. So believe it or not, they actually want these negotiations to fail. So there's a lot of moral hazards there. So, I guess the final and most obvious point is Donald Trump asked for two fixes in our border. He said, stop allowing illegal drugs, especially fentanyl, and stop allowing illegal migrants, including a growing number of suspected terrorists. And then he said, or else I'll put tariffs on you. But almost no one focused on the, can you please fix your border fence with us? And everyone went straight to the or else, and you had sort of a contest of which of the premiers or federal politicians would be the most butch in their threats to Trudeau. It was sort of pitiful and laughable. I mean, David Eby said, we're going to ban liquor, but only from the red states. And Doug Ford said, we're going to cancel rural internet that we had planned to deliver through Starlink because that'll make Elon Musk sad. And it was just this weird, it was sort of pitiful watching all these leftists who have weakened and emasculated Canada for years or decades suddenly strut about like they're ready for a brutal battle. I think Canada's lucky in that Donald Trump doesn't actually think about us that much. Might look like it because whenever he tweets about us, the Canadian media political establishment goes nuts for a whole week. But look at what Trump is doing. He's working on the Ukraine-Russia war. He's meeting with Israel and Saudi Arabia to fix the Middle East. He's hacking billions or soon trillions from the American budget. He's pushing through his cabinet. He is so busy on grown-up things. We think he's obsessed by us. I don't think he is. I think he enjoys rattling Trudeau's cage. And that's the last thing I'll say, is that like the rest of us, Trump sees through Trudeau in a second. He sees that Trudeau is a phony and a fake. And Trump is the kind of guy who remembers if you insult him. And I think Trump does remember. And so he's sort of shooting at Trudeau a bit, but unfortunately he's hitting the rest of us. And I think that's my biggest quarrel with Trump's proposed tariffs. Obviously, we don't need to have those tariffs put on us. We could just fix the border and Trump would walk away. But I guess the second thing is what America wants to do to punish Trudeau actually punishes the rest of us and America itself. If America drives away Canadian oil, which is by far the largest thing that Canada exports to the state, by a multiple, it's 3 times bigger than the total sales of the auto industry. That's going to directly hurt Americans by jacking up the price of the oil that goes into the refineries. It's going to be reflected at the pumps. And as I said in a tweet to Matt Gaetz the other day, if you don't want to buy Canadian oil, whose oil would you rather buy? Oil doesn't come from Switzerland. It comes from Canada and then a bunch of terrible places. And if you don't want us to sell our oil to the Americans, Tell us who you'd rather us sell it to. Do you really want us to sell our oil to China? Now, I think Canada should build pipelines to both coasts, but America should not drive our energy asset into the hands of bad people like China. Anyway, sorry, those are long answers to your good questions.
Well, you've said, Canada should build pipelines to both coasts. And, you've rightly pointed out, we kind of saw on Sunday night, temper tantrum Ford do his absolute worst, taking the American
Yeah.
alcohol on the shelves. It was quite a hilarious display. Of course, he found himself looking very silly, but a few hours later. But my
Hmm.
point is, for a few brief hours there on Sunday, we saw what some premiers said was their best Team Canada approach. They said, we're all in this together. And then, not but the very next day, we find out that Quebec still isn't willing to accept a pipeline from Alberta. So, I've said now, I think we've got a few years to really fix the problem of Canada's
Hmm.
export market. Alberta is totally reliant on our exports to the United States. And as you said, the US does need our oil. But what happens if they also decide to increase capacity there, and they decide that
Hmm.
they'd rather focus on that than continuing? Danielle Smith, she wants to actually ramp up oil production. And
Hmm.
so it would seem smart that Canada would diversify its export portfolio, but it doesn't look like the rest of Canada is interested in that when push comes to shove. How do we bridge that gap?
That's a tough one. And you're right. This whole Team Canada bravado lasted about 30 seconds. And now I mean, I see Mark Carney just said he's all for pipelines subject to Quebec's veto. I mean, they never meant this Team Canada. I mean, these people have spent years, if not decades, deracinating our country, demonizing our country, saying our country is guilty of genocide, stripping the prime minister off our $10 bill, putting John A. Macdonald in a coffin. Like seriously, Doug Ford, the great Canadian nationalist, on the steps of Queen's Park, that's the Ontario legislature, there's a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, and Doug Ford has put a wooden coffin around it. He doesn't quite have the courage to take the statue down, but nor does he have the principle to stand by it. So he's put a wooden coffin around him. So that's the guy who's Team Canada, the guy who won't even have our founding prime minister on a statue on his yard. So yeah, it's sort of pitiful. I actually ran into Danielle Smith in Washington the day before the inauguration. I interviewed her, and she had a whole suite in a hotel, and she was having it was like a boardroom, and she was having meeting after meeting after meeting, just putting through different U.S. officials and industry reps. It was amazing to watch, like clockwork. I mean, I had to show up exactly on time. I was given exactly 19 minutes or whatever it was, and she had an army of Alberta diplomats and bureaucrats setting up such a dense schedule for her. She did more diplomacy in the weeks before the inauguration and the weeks since than the entire rest of Canada combined, than all of Global Affairs Canada, all of the cabinet, and any other premier. In fact, I don't know any other premier that went down there. Um, Danielle Smith is the one saving our reputation in America. And by the way, I think Alberta should double its production, and we should build pipelines to the coast. But I think we have to reframe this for Donald Trump. I just recently bought. I used to have a copy. I lost it. I bought another copy of Art of the Deal, and I've started flipping through it. That's Donald Trump's best-selling book about being a negotiator, and it's all about New York real estate, but it's also about him and how he negotiates, and that he makes audacious demands to knock the other person off balance, and how he uses the media and the role of hyperbole. Like it's a fascinating and entertaining book, and it really is who Donald Trump is. And so if you think about that, who is he? He's a deal maker. He's someone who should be taken seriously, but perhaps not literally, because he's so audacious in his statements. And he loves making deals. Like, look at Gaza. He's talking about turning into the new Dubai. And he thinks about real estate. He thinks about land. He wants to annex Greenland. He wants to take back Panama. When he says he wants Canada as a 51st state, again, seriously, but not literally, what does he really want? Well, he wants our oil. He doesn't want a California-sized Democrat electoral college 51st state. He doesn't actually want Canada to join. He just wants all the good stuff, namely oil. I think that Canada has to make the America First case for oil to Trump. About a dozen years ago, I wrote a book called Ethical Oil, The Case for Canada's Oil Sands, and it was a left-wing book. I thought, let me make the left-wing argument for Canada's oil sands. And I did. I said, look, it's the world's fair trade coffee of oil producers. We're environmentally friendly. We're peaceful. We treat workers right. We respect civil liberties. Those are left-wing things, I said. So any liberal should love Canadian oil as opposed to Saudi Arabia, Russia, Nigeria, Iran, Venezuela, etc. That's the left-wing case. That's probably not going to work on Donald Trump. So what's the America First case? The America First case is don't tariff Canadian oil. Sign a 50-year deal for Canadian oil. $75 a barrel, 170 billion barrels, that's $13 trillion. Donald Trump loves using the billion word. He even loves using the word trillion more. What if Alberta led the way for a $13 trillion, 50-year deal of the century where Donald Trump could secure access to the oil sands? He's got it anyways in the USMCA. He actually already has preferred access to our oil. Let's just lock him into it. The companies that produce oil in Alberta are either American right now or they're Canadian companies with a lot of American shareholders. So Trump and America would benefit from it. Let's do an ethical oil deal with the America First president. Let's get him excited about it and lock him in. Instead of Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault and Melanie Joly acting out their hatred for Alberta, wanting to use it as a weapon. And you know what? If Quebec doesn't want Alberta oil, fine. Let them buy their OPEC conflict oil while Alberta sells the good stuff to Donald Trump.
You've raised the case for Alberta, increasing its capacity to the United States, that being a better argument. I think that we've seen Danielle Smith sort of position herself that way, saying, the United States, they want energy security and we can give them that energy security. So I have to ask, obviously, we thought those tariffs were going to come into effect on Monday. And when we did think that the energy exports were being pegged at 10% while other industries were 25%, that's a 15% difference. That's quite significant. Do you think we saw that 15% reduction on energy due to the fact that America is so reliant on Alberta's oil and their prices would have shot up? Or do you think that it was in part due to Danielle Smith's diplomacy, which you've spoken at length about, as well as, her efforts to meet Donald Trump's concerns by fortifying the Alberta border at the expense of the Alberta government?
Well, Donald Trump likes tariffs for two reasons. First of all, it makes a lot of money. It's an import tax. But second of all, it encourages companies to relocate into America, which is, reindustrialization, bringing the factories back. So that's why Trump likes tariffs. There's no electoral college votes in Windsor, Ontario for Donald Trump. So if he had his way, he would bring the auto industry back from Ontario and Quebec into Michigan, Ohio, other places like that. But you can't do that with the oil sands. The oil sands are where they are. A tariff is not going to make Syncrude and Suncor say, well, we'd better relocate to Texas. You can't, because the oil sands are where they are. So, yeah, it would bring in tax revenue for Trump, but it wouldn't relocate the oil sands. And all that oil is going straight into American refineries. So it's really punishing American consumers. Trump wants the tax benefit and the relocation. He'll get the taxes purely at the expense of American energy users, and he won't get the relocation. So I think that American refineries and American advocates listened to Danielle Smith, but listened to their own citizens and said, President Trump, you're shooting us here. Like it really is the worst tariff from an America First point of view you could possibly do. You're not going to move the asset into America. You're going to drive away the most America-friendly province in the country. And God forbid you drive that oil into the hands of communist China. You've just given them a strategic asset. What does China want? China wants America not to have access to the oil sands. China wants, if possible, its own access to the oil sands. You might remember about a decade or so ago, China tried to buy Nexen. In fact, I think it did buy Nexen, and it was looking to buying more oil. China wants control of the oil sands. I don't think America wants that. So, a dozen years ago, I tried to make the case for the oil sands in the language of the left. Ethical oil. peace oil, gender equality oil, gay rights friendly oil, excellent worker, compensation oil. Those are all liberal values. I think they're conservative values too, maybe. But with Trump, it's America first. What are you doing driving away strategic asset? What are you doing raising the prices on American refineries? What are you doing harming American oil producers? Like, tell me a single company in the oil sands. Okay, there are a few foreign, like European, I don't know all the companies operating there. There are probably some European companies there, but even those are probably listed on a stock exchange and probably have a majority of American shareholders. Like Syncrude, they have a lot of American pension plans, et cetera, that they're all listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So America First would say, what are you doing tariffing oil? Now, I don't want tariffs on any part of the Canadian economy, but oil is the craziest thing to tariff from an America First point of view.
Ezra, thank you so much.
Great to see you.
That was Ezra Levant, the founder and CEO of Rebel News. Okay, you guys, it's been a little bit since we've done this next segment, but I want to jump into responding to some of your comments from yesterday. So my producer, Jeff, has pulled up some of those. Now, you guys might be surprised to hear me say that I know I have a new producer. Sean has left. He's working on Candace's show. I'm sure that you guys have seen that my boss, Candace Malcolm, is back and producing great content pretty much every day. So Jeff has gone through your comments and he's picked out some of the best ones. I'm going to dive through those now. First, we have ask a Canadian to explain what it means to be Canadian, but tell them they can't use American, America, or Trump in their answer. You'll get a very confused look. This is a very true comment because so many Americans, as Viva said yesterday, so many Canadians rather, they describe themselves as essentially being not America, which is a really lame answer. And in my estimation, it's actually quite a big problem we have in this country, this lack of national identity. And I think it's obviously gotten far worse under Justin Trudeau, who has described Canada as a post-national state. Until recently with the tariffs, of course. Our next comment here is from Rose Waddell, who said, thank you, Trump, for forcing Trudeau and team to clean up the border and drugs finally after 9 years. Canada needs a Trump. I think that a lot of Canadian conservatives feel that way, or even just rational people who feel concerned about the flood of immigration that we're seeing into Canada. Certainly, most of us, I think, would agree. I'm sure if you're watching the show, you have those concerns. And I think a lot of us, we've seen what's gone on with Trump and the tariffs, and we said, in a way, this is actually benefiting Canada now. If we do see those tariffs come into place, that will be very difficult for the Canadian economy, as we've discussed at length. But the actual act of the border being cleaned up has been a very good thing for us. And it's actually a little sad that it took a leader of another country to get Canada to clean up its own border, something that the Canadian citizens have been wanting and asking for. Finally, our last comment here from user William McGuide says, Pierre Poilievre has never complained about border and immigration until Trump got elected. He's a very timid progressive conservative or a very centrist liberal. I agree with some of your sentiment here. Pierre Poilievre was definitely not the strongest or the loudest voice on immigration. We've only seen him come out now and say that he would call for deportations for illegals or for people who are here on visas or permits that are committing crimes, that they would be sent home, because we've seen the sentiment in Canada shift so much. And as I've said 100 times, and I'm sure I'll say 100 more times until we have a federal election, Pierre Poilievre is someone who watches very carefully the polls, public opinion, the sentiments of the country, and speaks when it is safe to do so. And we've absolutely seen him do this on immigration, because you can go back and find old videos of him calling for citizenship for students who are here on work visas and things like that. All right, everyone, that is all we have time for today. Don't forget to give me some suggested story ideas that you'd like to see me guys covered. I keep saying to everyone, I'm kind of tired of talking about tariffs. I don't know if that makes me a bad journalist, but it's just the truth. I'm tired of talking about it. I know you guys at home are tired of listening to it. So please, if there's a story that you're like, please, Rachel, we want to know more about this, let me know in the comment section below. And I'm sure that Jeff, we will point some of them out to me over the weekend. All right, guys, have a great rest of your week. God bless.